She knelt in the snow because the alternative was death, and death would have been kinder. The rejection had come swift as a blade, cast from the silver ridge pack at dawn, her scent stripped from the bond mark on her wrist with ritual fire. They called her barren, broken, a curse wrapped in an Omega's skin. Her mate had laughed when the healers confirmed it. No pups, no future, no worth. He chose another within the hour, and the Alpha permitted it. Now she was nothing, a ghost wearing flesh. The castle loomed above her like a monument to power she could never possess. Ironhelm, seat of the Northern King, a fortress carved from black stone and elder magic, where the Alpha King ruled over 3 provinces and commanded respect through fear alone. The guards at the gate barely glanced at her. A starving Omega was beneath their notice. She climbed the steps anyway, her silver cloak torn at the hem, her dark hair matted with frost. The wind carried the scent of pine and distant fire. Above, the moon hung swollen and pale, indifferent to her suffering. Inside, warmth struck her like violence. She stood in a vast hall, where torches burned with unnatural brightness, and the stone floors reflected her broken image 1,000 times over. Servants moved through the shadows with purpose. Nobody stopped her until she reached the throne room. The Alpha King sat alone. She had heard stories, whispered in taverns, sung in cautious ballads. They said he ruled with an iron will and a conscience, a rare combination in a monarch wolf. They said he had refused 3 fated mates because the bonds felt hollow, forced by destiny rather than truth. They said he was cursed to rule alone, marked by a wound no healer could close, carrying the weight of 1,000 deaths from wars he had ended but could never forgive himself for starting. What they did not say was that he was beautiful in the way broken things are beautiful, the way ruins hold more truth than palaces. He looked up from the map spread before him, and his eyes, amber and ancient, fixed on her with sudden, terrifying clarity. "I have nothing to offer," she whispered, and her voice cracked like ice. "No rank, no bloodline, no strength. But I can work. I can serve. I ask only for shelter and bread. I will not speak unless commanded. I will not claim space you do not grant me." He rose slowly, and she felt the weight of his dominion press against her skin like a physical thing. He was tall, shoulders broad as a mountain, scarred across one forearm with symbols she did not recognize. His face was hewn from shadow and sorrow. "What is your name?" His voice was quiet, lethal. "Sienna," she breathed. "I was called Sienna once. You were cast out." Not a question. She nodded, unable to meet his gaze. He descended the steps toward her, and her instinct screamed to run. Instead, she stood frozen, her heart a wild thing in her chest. When he reached her, he did not touch her. He simply breathed, and she understood. He was reading her scent, her story, everything her body carried. "The Silver Ridge Alpha was a fool," he said finally, "and a coward." Something inside her shattered at his words, not in pain, but in the strange relief of being seen, of being acknowledged, not as broken, but as wronged. "Come," he commanded, and turned toward the inner chambers. "You will not serve in kitchens or stables. You will walk these halls as a guest of Ironhelm, and you will tell me your truth, every piece of it, until I understand what they threw away." She followed him through corridors, lit by moonlight, through high windows, past tapestries that showed wolves running beneath silver skies. Her legs trembled. Her mind could not comprehend mercy on this scale. When they reached his chamber, vast, lined with books and a fireplace where crimson flames danced, he gestured to a seat near the warmth. "Sit," he said. "Eat. Rest. Tomorrow we begin to understand what strength truly looks like." She sat, and for the first time in days, she felt something other than despair stir in her chest. It was not hope, not yet, but it was close. Outside, the northern wind howled against the stone, and the moon, that ancient witness, rose higher still, silver and knowing, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment all along, as if two broken things meeting in the dark might become something whole. The Alpha King did not sleep. Sienna discovered this on her third night at Ironhelm when she woke to the sound of his footsteps pacing the corridor outside her chamber. She had been given rooms adjoining his own, a luxury and a torment, because proximity to him was like standing too close to a flame, warming and burning simultaneously. She wrapped herself in the silver robe they had provided and opened her door. He stood at the window overlooking the northern territories, his back to her, bare-chested in the cold. Scars crisscrossed his shoulders and spine, battle wounds, yes, but something else beneath them. Mark scars, the kind left by broken bonds. "You should not see this," he said without turning. His voice was rough with exhaustion. "I did not mean to intrude," she replied softly. "I heard distress." He finally turned, and she saw the truth written across his face. This was a man at war with himself. His amber eyes held centuries of regret. "I killed my first mate," he said, as if continuing a conversation they had already begun. "Not with blade or fang, but with ambition. She begged me to lay down the crown, to choose a quieter life. I refused. I told her duty demanded more. She walked into a storm 3 winters later and did not walk back." Sienna's breath caught. She had heard the legend, the Alpha King's tragic loss, but never the truth beneath it. The second was a political bond, arranged to unite the eastern provinces. I felt nothing for her. She knew it. On our bonding night, she poisoned herself rather than spend eternity with a man who could not love her. He turned back to the window. The third was different. She came to me willingly, asking nothing but honesty. I gave her that. I told her I was too broken to be worthy of her light. She accepted the curse, as a lover accepts scars. "What happened to her?" Sienna asked. "I let her leave," he whispered, "because love, true love, cannot live under a roof built on guilt. She deserved freedom. I gave her that." He stood in silence for a long moment, the firelight from the distant torches casting his silhouette in bronze and shadow. "3 bonds broken," he continued, 3 souls marked by proximity to me. The northern priests say I am cursed, that no fated mate will ever find peace at my side. They say the goddess itself has sealed me away from such mercy. Sienna moved closer, drawn by something she could not name. "Do you believe them?" He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the hunger in his eyes, not for her body, but for the possibility that someone might see him and not turn away. "I believe," he said slowly, "that I have been running from the answer for so long that I have forgotten the question." She reached out, and her fingers found the largest scar on his chest, one that formed a pattern like a broken chain. "This one," she said, tracing it gently. "Where did this come from?" "The night I chose the crown over my first mate's life. A guard cut me when I refused to abdicate. I did not heal it. I wanted to carry the wound." "Then let me help you understand something," Sienna whispered. And her Omega nature rose in her, not submission, but service of a different kind. "Wounds are not meant to be worn forever. They are meant to teach us and then to scar." She pressed her forehead to his chest and felt his heartbeat, wild, desperate, alive. He wrapped his arms around her, not in possession, but in acknowledgement. 2 exiles, meeting in the dark. Outside, the moon began to set, and the first light of dawn crept across the snow. Neither of them moved. In that moment, wrapped in silence and shared sorrow, they began to understand that redemption is not about erasing the past. It is about choosing, despite the past, to believe in tomorrow. On the 7th night, Sienna's gift revealed itself. She did not know she had a gift until then. In her former pack, she had been dismissed as Omega, a designation that meant servant, breeder, nothing more. But the healers at Silver Ridge had whispered something once, something her mate had silenced with a cruel hand. Pathfinder. The word meant someone who could see threads others could not. Someone who walked between worlds. The Alpha King was fevered. She found him thrashing in his chamber, his skin burning despite the winter cold pressing through the stone walls. The healers of Ironhelm stood helpless, their remedies useless against whatever curse had seized him. "Leave," Sienna commanded, and they obeyed. Perhaps because she spoke with the authority of the king's favor, or perhaps because they sensed something in her they could not name. She sat beside his bed and took his burning hand, and then she saw. Images flooded her mind like water breaking a dam, battlefields where men fell beneath the Alpha King's claws, bodies piled like snow. A woman's face, twisted in sorrow. A crown made of bone and blood. A debt unpaid, a sin unabsolved, eating him alive from within. This was his true curse, not divine punishment, but the weight of his own conscience, manifested as illness, as fever, as the slow poisoning of a soul that could not forgive itself. Sienna closed her eyes and breathed. She had never done this before, but somehow she knew how. She let her own essence, the part of her that the other pack had called broken, extend outward. She let it touch his darkness, not to heal it, but to acknowledge it, to say, "I see this, I see you, and you are not damned for feeling." A silver light bloomed between them. It was not Omega healing. It was something older, something the goddess had woven into certain souls, the ability to carry another's burden long enough for them to set it down, to offer passage through the darkness without demanding the darkness disappear. The fever broke. When morning came, the Alpha King woke to find her asleep in the chair beside his bed, her hand still resting on his chest. His skin was cool, his mind was clear, and for the first time in centuries he could breathe without the weight of his guilt crushing his lungs. He rose slowly and moved to the window. The northern sky was beginning to shift, winter's grip loosening, though snow still fell in gentle spirals. The moon was visible even in daylight, pale and patient. When Sienna woke, she found him watching her with an expression she had never seen before. Not desire, not gratitude, something deeper. "What are you?" he asked, and his voice held wonder rather than fear. "I do not know," she answered honestly. "I only know that when I touched you, I understood something. The healers at Silver Ridge called it the Pathfinder gift, the ability to navigate suffering without drowning in it." The Alpha King knelt before her, a gesture that made her breath catch because no one of his station knelt to anyone. "Then let me ask you something," he said, "and I ask it not as a king, but as a man who has walked alone for too long. Will you teach me how to navigate the world differently? Not as one who rules from guilt, but as one who chooses compassion despite his past?" Before she could answer, the castle bells began to ring, a sound that echoed across the stone and into the valleys beyond. Sienna understood then that everything was about to change, and she was terrified, not of him, but of the possibility that she might be worthy of the redemption he was offering. They came in the snow. The Silver Ridge pack, led by her former mate and his new companion, arrived at Ironhelm's gates with demands and threats. Word had spread through the territories that the Alpha King harbored a rejected Omega, and they had come to reclaim their property and restore honor. Sienna stood in the great hall, flanked by the Alpha King as her former mate, a man with cruel eyes and a crueler smile, strode across the marble floor like he owned it. "Return her," he snarled, "and we will forget this insult to the Silver Ridge honor. She is damaged goods, unsuitable even for servitude. We were merciful to cast her out." The Alpha King did not rise from his throne. He did not need to. The power that radiated from him was enough to make the other wolves lower their eyes. "Honor," he said slowly, "is not found in the rejection of the broken. It is found in the choice to see value where others see only flaw. She cannot bear pups, the former mate spat. She is worthless. Sienna felt the words like physical blows, felt the old shame rising in her chest. But then, she felt something else, the Alpha King's presence, steady and immovable beside her. She has worth that your limited mind could never comprehend, the king said, and his voice carried the promise of violence. She possesses a gift your healers were too ignorant to recognize. She carries a light that your darkness could never understand. This is madness, the former mate hissed. You are bewitched by a Baron Omega. The council will hear of this. Let them, the Alpha King replied calmly. I have ruled Ironhelm for 3 centuries. I have earned the right to choose who deserves to stand beside me. And I choose her, not because she is Omega, not because she is broken, but because she saw me at my lowest and chose to offer mercy instead of judgment. He stood then and descended the steps. When he reached Sienna, he extended his hand. She took it. The contact sent a shockwave through the hall. The silver light that had appeared during her healing returned, brighter now, a visible manifestation of something the Ancient Ones recognized. Recognition, destiny, a bond not imposed by fate, but chosen by will. The former mate stumbled backward, his face draining of color. Impossible, he breathed. You cannot bond with her. She is Luna, the Alpha King said, the title carrying weight like thunder. Not because I decree it, but because she has already proven herself worthy of it. She walked through the storm of rejection and did not lose her light. She saw a king drowning in guilt and offered him passage to redemption. Such strength is rare, such grace is rarer still. He turned to Sienna, and in his amber eyes she saw no pity, no charity, only recognition of an equal, a soulmate, a mirror of his own broken beauty. If you will have me, he said, not as a king to subject, but as a wolf to wolf, as a soul to soul, I wish to spend eternity learning how you see the world so differently than I do. Sienna's hands trembled. This was not what she had come to Ironhelm seeking. She had come to survive. Instead, she was being offered something far more dangerous, a chance to transform. Yes, she whispered. Yes. The silver light engulfed them both, and the former mate and his companions fled, unable to bear the radiance of a bond forged not by obligation, but by choice. As the great doors closed behind them, Sienna understood that her rejection had not been a curse. It had been a doorway. The bonding ceremony was not what tradition demanded. There were no priests, no elaborate rituals, no public declarations of political alliance. Instead, the Alpha King and Sienna stood alone in the Temple of the Wolves, an ancient chamber carved into the mountain itself, where the first packs had made their vows beneath the moon. Torchlight reflected off walls carved with symbols older than language. The moon hung directly above the chamber's open roof, its light falling like silver rain. In the old ways, the king said, his voice echoing through stone and time, a bond was not a transaction. It was a promise made freely, witnessed by the goddess alone. He took her hands, and Sienna felt the heat of him, the life force that thrummed beneath his skin. I promise, he continued, to see you in your wholeness, not your incompleteness, to honor the strength it took to survive rejection and still believe in goodness, to build a world where being different is not cause for exile, but recognition. Tears fell down Sienna's face as she spoke her own vows. I promise to walk beside you without fear, not because you are powerful, but because you are kind despite your power, to carry your burdens when you grow weary, to remind you that redemption is possible because you have already begun it. They pressed their foreheads together, and their scents mingled, her silver frost essence intertwining with his wildfire nature. The mark appeared on her wrist where the rejection scar had been, not the mark of submission, but the mark of choice. a lunar symbol, silver and unbreakable. His mark appeared on his chest, over the scarred wound that had carried his guilt. A phoenix rising, wreathed in snow. When they stepped out of the temple, the northern sky was transforming. Spring was coming early. The healers would later say it was impossible, that nature did not bend to mortal will. But Sienna knew better. The goddess herself was acknowledging what had been created in that chamber. A love that transcended hierarchy, a bond that defied tradition. The Alpha King led her to the highest tower of Ironhelm, where they could see for leagues in every direction. The snow was beginning to melt, revealing grass beneath. Wolves emerged from the forests, and instead of looking away, they howled, a sound of recognition, of acceptance, of a new era beginning. The council will resist this, he told her as they watched the territories awaken. There are those who believe the old ways, that Omegas should be subjects, not partners. That emotion has no place in rule. Let them resist, Sienna said, feeling the truth of it. We have already proven something they cannot deny, that the strongest bonds are built on choice, not compulsion. He wrapped his arms around her, and she leaned back against him, watching the world transform beneath the retreating stars. That night, she had a dream. She saw herself standing in a great hall, speaking to gathered wolves, both Omega and Alpha, both servant and sovereign. She saw herself not as Luna in title, but as Luna in truth. A bridge between worlds, a voice for those who had been silenced, a proof that rejection could become redemption. When she woke, the Alpha King was already awake, watching her with that expression of wonder that never faded. I saw your future, she murmured. Tell me, he asked, and she understood he was not demanding. He was inviting her to share. You are going to transform everything, she said, not through conquest, but through compassion, and I will help you. Because I understand now what it means to be called broken and choosing to call yourself strong instead. He kissed her then, and it tasted like redemption, like moonlight, like the possibility that even the deepest wounds can become the foundation for something beautiful. 3 months passed, and change moved through Ironhelm like water finding new channels. The Alpha King issued a proclamation that echoed across the northern territories. No pack could reject or exile an Omega without trial. No being, regardless of rank, could be deemed worthless based on bloodline or fertility. The old hierarchies began to crack. Not everyone celebrated. The Council of Elders convened, and Sienna was summoned to face them. She walked into the chamber draped in silver, not to flaunt her new status, but because the color had become her symbol, the Queen of Prophecy, the Pathfinder Luna, the one who had changed the king's heart. An old wolf, scarred and bitter, rose to challenge her. You are an Omega, he spat. How dare you stand beside the throne? How dare you presume to influence the decisions of centuries? Sienna stepped forward, and the silver light that had become her signature began to glow faintly around her. I stand beside the throne because I was chosen, not appointed, she said calmly. Not because I am powerful in the way you understand power, but because I understand something you have forgotten. That true strength lies in the capacity to see another's worth when the world has declared them worthless. She gestured around the chamber. How many of you have rejected mates because they did not fit your expectations? How many of you have cast out young wolves for being different? How many of you have built your reigns on fear instead of trust? The silence was answer enough. I do not ask you to like me, Sienna continued. I ask you to consider this. What if the future is not found in maintaining the old power structures, but in imagining something new? What if strength is not measured in dominance, but in wisdom? The Alpha King watched from his throne, and she felt his pride, not possessive, but genuine. The old wolf sat down slowly, and one by one, the others bowed their heads in acknowledgement, if not full acceptance. After the council dispersed, The king found her in the Tower of Moons, a chamber she had claimed as her own. "You were magnificent," he said. "I was terrified," she admitted. "But I realized something. They were trying to intimidate me with the same fear they have always used. And it no longer works. Because I have already been rejected. There is nothing more they can threaten me with." He took her hand and pressed it to his heart. "You have taught me that redemption is not about erasing the past," he said quietly. "It is about transforming it. Every war I fought, every life I took in the name of honor, I cannot undo those. But I can ensure that no wolf ever suffers unnecessarily again. And I can do this only because you showed me how." That night, they stood together as the moon rose full and silver over Ironhelm. Wolves gathered in the courtyard below, not divided by rank or bloodline, but united in witnessing a new age. The Alpha King raised his hand, and Sienna raised hers. Their marks glowed in unison. And across the northern territories, everyone who saw that light understood. The old world was ending. The new world had begun. To those watching, comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. But transformation demands a price. 3 days after the council gathering, Sienna collapsed. The healers could find no wound, no illness, no physical cause. Yet she grew weaker by the hour, her silver light beginning to fade. The Alpha King sat beside her bed, refusing to leave, though his presence only seemed to accelerate her decline. "You must go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Your proximity strengthens the bond. The bond is draining me." "Then let it drain me instead," he replied fiercely. "I did not survive centuries of loneliness only to lose you now." But Sienna understood what the healers could not. The price of becoming Luna was not simple. It was not a title bestowed and accepted. It was an exchange. In choosing to bond with the king, in choosing to transform the territories, she had taken upon herself the weight of all those choices. Every soul that would be spared from exile, every life that would be lived differently because she had stood before the council and spoken truth. It was a burden too great for one creature to bear alone. On the 4th day, the Alpha King found her sitting in the Temple of the Wolves at dawn. "If you are here to tell me you are leaving," he began, pain stark in his voice, "then do not. I cannot bear it." "I am not leaving," Sienna said gently. "But I must choose a different path. The Pathfinder gift, it was never meant to be wielded by one person for eternity. It burns too bright. It consumes." She took his hands. "There is another way. I can teach others. I can spread this gift, this light, across multiple souls. No single bearer will be overwhelmed. The burden becomes shared. The light becomes stronger because it is not concentrated in one place." "You would give away your power?" he asked, comprehension dawning slowly. "I would transform it," she corrected. "I would not be Luna alone. I would be the first of many, a council of pathfinders, wolves who understand rejection and redemption, who can help govern with compassion instead of fear." The Alpha King pulled her close, and she felt his tears against her skin. "This is the sacrifice you spoke of," he whispered. "In choosing to change the world, you must change yourself in ways that terrify you." "Yes," she said. "But it is a sacrifice I make willingly, not because duty demands it, but because love demands it. And love, true love, is always willing to transform itself for the beloved." Over the following weeks, Sienna trained others, Omegas who had been rejected, Alphas who had questioned their own dominance, young wolves who had never known the old hierarchies. She taught them to see the Pathfinder gift, to cultivate it, to use it with wisdom. The burden on her shoulders lightened, and as it did, a new understanding emerged. The most powerful transformation is not the one imposed by force or decree, but the one that happens gradually through the choices of many, each one adding their light to the growing dawn. 1 year had passed since Sienna knelt in the snow outside Ironhelm's gates. The territories had changed beyond recognition. The old hierarchies still existed. Change is never immediate, never complete, but they had begun to shift. Omegas who had been deemed worthless were now recognized as valuable. Alphas who had ruled through fear were learning to lead through vision. Packs that had been isolated for centuries were beginning to gather, not as rivals, but as partners in building something new. The Alpha King and his Luna stood on the highest tower as spring turned to summer, watching the world transform. "Do you remember?" he asked. "What you said when you first arrived?" "That I had nothing to offer," Sienna said softly. "That I would accept any crumb of mercy. And now?" She turned to face him, and in her eyes he saw the truth. She had become exactly what the goddess had intended all along, not a servant, not even a Luna in the traditional sense, but a bridge, a healer, a voice for the voiceless. "Now," she said, "I understand that I was never broken. I was only waiting to be seen by someone whose sight went deeper than the surface." The Alpha King pulled her close, and they watched as the night fell and the moon rose, that ancient witness, that keeper of secrets and truths. Below them, in the courtyard, a gathering had begun. Wolves from across the territories coming to witness the anniversary of the new accord, the day when the Alpha King and his Luna had declared a new way of ruling, one based not on dominance, but on compassion. A young Omega stood before the crowd, her voice shaking but clear as she told her own story of rejection and redemption. She had come to the training that Sienna had begun, and her gift, similar to the Luna's, was beginning to bloom. She would become one of the council. She would help guide the next generation. And then another wolf stepped forward, an alpha who had once ruled through fear, now learning to lead through understanding. He spoke of how the new accord had changed him, had freed him from the burden of maintaining the old ways, and another, and another. Each story was different, but each carried the same thread, the possibility of transformation. The truth that rejection need not be final, that redemption is available to anyone willing to see themselves differently. The Alpha King watched Sienna watch them, and he understood in that moment the true nature of their bond. It was not romantic in the traditional sense, though their love was real and deep. It was something more profound, a partnership forged in the understanding that true redemption requires witness, that the greatest gift one can offer another is to see them fully and completely and declare them worthy. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked. Sienna considered the question carefully. The rejection still hurt when she allowed herself to feel it. The years of being told she was worthless had left scars that would never fully disappear. But those scars had become her strength. They had taught her to see others' pain and hold it without flinching. "No regrets," she said finally. "Only gratitude. For the rejection that led me here. For the Alpha King who saw past his own pain long enough to recognize mine. For the goddess who guided me to this moment." As the night deepened, they descended from the tower and walked among their people. The crowd parted for them respectfully, not out of fear, but out of genuine affection. These were wolves who had been healed by the new accord, who had been given a second chance, who saw in their Luna and King the living proof that redemption was possible. Near the fire, a child approached Sienna, a young Omega who had been born since the changes had begun. This girl had never known the old ways. She had never experienced the shame of being deemed worthless based on her designation. "Are you really the one who changed everything?" the girl asked, her eyes wide with wonder. Sienna knelt to meet her at eye level. "No," she said gently, "but I was the one who chose to be changed by everything. And sometimes, when one person makes that choice, it opens the door for others to do the same." The Alpha King watched, and his heart, that wounded, Guilty thing that had carried so much weight for so long, finally found peace. Not the peace of stasis, of having overcome and moved past, but the peace of ongoing transformation, of learning to live with wounds and scars as part of the story rather than as the end of it. As the moon reached its zenith, the gathering grew quiet. Wolves began to sing, an ancient sound, the howl of recognition and unity. Sienna and the Alpha King joined them, their voices intertwining like silver and gold thread, creating a harmony that had never existed before. Above them, the moon, patient, eternal, unchanging, bore witness once more to the truth that every soul carries, that rejection can become resurrection, that the deepest wounds can become the foundation for the greatest love. That redemption is not a destination, but a choice made again and again, beneath the eternal watch of the stars. In the years to come, this night would be remembered. Songs would be written about it. The new accord would spread beyond the northern territories, reaching packs that had never imagined such transformation was possible. But for now, in this moment, there was only the sound of wolves singing beneath the moon, and two souls who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to build a light that would guide others home. The moon remembered. The moon always remembers. And so would the world. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive. 5 years after the new accord, the territories had become unrecognizable to those who remembered the old ways. Ironhelm had transformed from a fortress of fear into a sanctuary of learning. The halls that once echoed with commands and declarations now thrummed with the voices of wolves gathered in circles, sharing stories, teaching one another, building something that had no name in the old language because it had never existed before, a community built on choice rather than hierarchy. Sienna stood in the Archive of Moons, a vast library carved into the mountain's heart, and traced her fingers along the spines of books that had been written in the past 5 years. Each one documented a different story of redemption. Each one was a testament to what could happen when rejection became the beginning of transformation rather than its end. A young pathfinder named Kale approached, carrying scrolls that needed cataloging. She had been rejected from her birth pack for refusing to accept a mate chosen by her alpha. She had found her way to Ironhelm 2 years ago, broken and terrified. Now she stood with confidence, her silver mark, the symbol of the Pathfinders, visible on her wrist. "Luna," Kyle said respectfully, "the delegation from the Eastern Territories has arrived. They wish to establish their own Council of Pathfinders." Sienna smiled. This was happening more frequently now. Other regions, seeing the stability and peace that had come to the north, wanted to implement their own versions of the new accord. Some adapted it perfectly. Others struggled with the fundamental shift required, the surrender of absolute dominance in exchange for shared wisdom. "Send word that I will meet with them at sunset," Sienna replied. "But first, ensure they are shown the gardens. Let them see what has been grown here." The gardens were perhaps the most visible symbol of the transformation. 5 years ago, they had been barren stone and ice. Now they bloomed year-round with flowers that should not have survived in the northern climate. The healers said it was impossible. Sienna knew better. The land itself had been healed by the new accord, responding to the shift in consciousness that had swept across it. As Kale departed, the Alpha King entered through the archive's great doors. He moved with the same power he always had, but it was different now. No longer the rigid control of a sovereign ruling through fear, but the easy confidence of one who had learned to trust others with his burden. "The Council wishes to speak with you," he said, coming to stand beside her. "The matter of the Western Territories has become complicated." Sienna turned to him, and even after 5 years, she felt the connection between them like a physical thing, not possessive, not demanding, but steady and true. "What complication?" she asked. "Their alpha refuses to accept the principles of the new accord," He believes that power must remain concentrated, that Omegas cannot be trusted with authority. He is gathering support among the traditionalist packs, preparing for conflict. Sienna felt the familiar weight settle in her chest. This was the price of transformation, the resistance from those who had built their entire identity around the old structures. "Then we must go to him," she said simply, "not with force, but with understanding. Show him that the new accord does not diminish strength, it redistributes it. A leader who trusts his people is stronger than one who must constantly watch for betrayal." The Alpha King nodded, but there was concern in his eyes. "You know this may not work. He may refuse to listen." "I know," Sienna acknowledged, "but I also know that every alpha was once an uncertain young wolf. Every one of them carries wounds. Perhaps his wound is fear, fear of losing control, fear of being seen as weak if he shares power. Perhaps we can help him understand that vulnerability is not weakness." That evening, as they prepared to journey to the Western Territories, the Alpha King found Sienna in their chamber, a vast space overlooking the territories, decorated with artifacts from their journey together. On the wall hung a tapestry depicting their bonding night, woven by artists from 3 different packs working together. "I have something for you," he said, and produced a small box of elderwood. Inside lay a necklace, a pendant made from silver and firestone, depicting a phoenix rising from snow. But unlike the mark on his chest, this one included elements of the moon as well, a perfect balance of his symbol and hers intertwined. "5 years ago," he said, as he fastened it around her neck, "you knelt before me asking for nothing but shelter. Today, you stand as the pillar upon which an entire transformation rests. I wanted to create something that honors not just your role as Luna, but your role as the one who taught me what it means to love without condition." Sienna touched the pendant, feeling the warmth of the firestone beneath her fingers. "And I," she replied softly, "wanted to honor something as well." She revealed the gift she had been preparing in secret, a book bound in leather from the sacred white deer of the northern forests. Inside were written his stories, not the sanitized versions told in the old tales, but the truth, his pain, his regret, his journey toward redemption. And beside each entry, she had written her own reflections on what she had learned from him. The Alpha King opened it carefully as if the pages might shatter, and read the first entry in Sienna's elegant hand. He was dying in the snow when her song made him remember what it meant to live. But what he did not know was that he was also healing her, that in his willingness to be seen in his brokenness, he gave her permission to stop hiding hers. This is the true nature of redemption. It is never one-directional. It is always a mirror, reflecting our own capacity for change back to us. He looked up at her, tears streaming down his scarred face. "You have seen me," he whispered, "truly seen me, in a way no one ever has." "And you saw me," Sienna replied. "When everyone else saw only what I lacked, you saw what I carried. That is the gift. That is the redemption." They held each other as the moon rose outside their window, and in that moment, neither of them thought about the challenges ahead or the resistance that would come. They simply existed in the knowledge that they had found each other, and in finding each other, had found the capacity to transform a world. The journey to the Western Territories took 3 days. Sienna and the Alpha King traveled with a small group of pathfinders and warriors, but deliberately without the show of force that had once accompanied royal processions. They came as equals seeking dialogue, not as sovereigns demanding submission. The Western Alpha, a wolf named Torvin, received them with barely concealed hostility. He was younger than the Alpha King by perhaps 2 centuries, but he carried himself with the rigid authority of one who had never questioned his right to rule. "I know why you have come," Torvin said before they could speak. "You wish to convince me that your new accord is the way forward. that I should surrender my authority to a council of Omegas and question-asking Alphas. It will not happen. The Alpha King remained calm. I do not wish to convince you to surrender anything. I wish to show you that sharing does not diminish. What happened next became legend in the territories. Sienna stepped forward and asked Torvin a single question. What do you fear? The question was so simple, so direct, that it caught everyone off guard. Torvin's face darkened with anger, but beneath the anger, the Alpha King and Sienna could see the fear. I fear, Torvin finally said quietly, that if I show weakness, my pack will turn on me. That if I admit I do not have all the answers, they will replace me. That everything I have built will crumble. Sienna moved closer, and her silver mark glowed faintly in the torchlight. That is the old way of thinking, she said gently. In the old way, weakness was indeed danger. Leaders had to be infallible because any crack in the facade meant destruction. But what if I told you that the strongest leaders are those who can admit uncertainty? What if I told you that your pack would respect you more for asking for their wisdom than for demanding obedience? She told him her story then, not the sanitized version, but the whole truth. The rejection, the shame, the belief that she was worthless. And how, in being seen by someone who looked deeper, she had learned to see herself differently. You fear being replaced, she concluded. But what if, instead, you became irreplaceable? Not through dominance, but through being the one who listens, the one who helps others find their own strength. That is a leadership that cannot be challenged, because it is built on trust rather than fear. Torvin was silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. If I were to implement this new accord in my territories, what would I have to do? And so the conversation began. It was not a quick conversion. Torvin did not become an enlightened leader overnight, but he agreed to try. He agreed to establish a small council. He agreed to listen to the voices he had previously silenced. It was a beginning. As the Alpha King and Sienna prepared to leave the Western Territories 3 days later, Torvin approached them with something he had written, a formal acknowledgement of the new accord sealed with his mark. I do not know if this will work, he admitted, but I know that continuing the old way was slowly killing something in me. Perhaps your way will allow me to live differently. The years that followed saw the new accord spread to 7 more territories. Not all accepted it willingly. Some required conflict to understand that the old ways were no longer sustainable. But gradually, the world shifted. 10 years after Sienna had knelt in the snow, the Council of Territories met for the first time. It was held not in Ironhelm, but in a neutral location, the Temple of the Wolves, which had been expanded to accommodate representatives from every pack. The Alpha King sat not at the head of the council, but as one voice among many. Beside him sat Sienna, and around them sat other pathfinders, young and old, male and female, formerly rejected and now recognized as invaluable. They debated, they disagreed, they learned from one another. A young wolf who had been cast out for being born without the typical strength of an alpha stood to speak. With the new accord, he had discovered he possessed the gift of healing and meditation, skills the old system never would have recognized or cultivated. Because of the changes my Luna and King initiated, he said, gesturing to Sienna and the Alpha King, I am not dead. I was meant to die in the snow, cast out as useless. Instead, I have spent the past 10 years helping others heal from the trauma of rejection. My life has meaning because someone believed that rejection could become a doorway rather than a tomb. The council chamber erupted in sounds of agreement and affirmation. That night, Sienna and the Alpha King stood alone in the Temple of the Wolves, the same place where they had bonded 10 years earlier. The moon was full again, as it had been then, and the light fell through the open roof in silver cascades. Do you remember, the Alpha King asked, what I asked you that night? If I would teach you how to navigate the world differently, Sienna said softly, how to choose compassion despite your past. And have I learned? He asked with a slight smile. You have become my greatest student, she replied, and my greatest teacher, because you have shown me that even the most powerful creatures can choose vulnerability, that even kings can bow before the truth. He took her hand and pressed it to his heart, where the phoenix scar had faded over the years to barely a whisper beneath his skin. The wound is still there, he said. It always will be, but it no longer defines me. Neither does my rejection, Sienna replied, but it will always be part of my story, and I would not change it, because without it, I would never have become who I needed to be to help transform this world. As they stood in the silver moonlight, they understood something profound. Redemption is not about erasing the past. It is about honoring it, learning from it, and using it to build something better. The moon, that eternal witness, continued its ancient journey across the sky. But now, beneath it, a world was being rebuilt on foundations of compassion, on the belief that every soul carries value, on the radical principle that rejection can become the beginning of resurrection. In the territories, wolves who had been cast out were finding their way home, not to the places they came from, but to new places where they were recognized and valued. Leaders who had ruled through fear were learning to lead through trust. Young wolves born in this new era would never know the shame that their elders had carried. And it had all begun with a single act of mercy. An alpha king who saw a rejected Omega and chose to see not her brokenness, but her light. 15 years later, a child was born, a daughter with her mother's silver eyes and her father's ancient wisdom. She bore no gender-specific designation because the territories had finally learned that such categories served only to limit rather than to illuminate. When the child first learned to walk, she wandered into the Temple of the Wolves alone and stood beneath the moon. The healers who found her said she was staring at something only she could see, perhaps the future, perhaps the goddess herself. Her mother asked her later, "What did you see, little one?" "I saw all the wolves who had been broken," the child replied with the clarity that sometimes comes to those born under the new accord. "And I saw that they were not broken. They were just waiting to be seen by someone who understood that scars are not marks of shame. They are marks of survival." Sienna held her daughter close and understood that the work was far from over. There would be many more generations who would need to be taught this lesson. But the foundation had been laid. The proof existed. One could live differently. One could build a world where rejection was transformed into redemption, where the broken were recognized as the strongest, where love was not a reward for the powerful, but a choice available to all. The moon rose on the territories, and beneath its light, the Moonblood Chronicles continued, not as a story that was finished, but as a story that would echo through eternity, reminding every soul that heard it, you are not alone in your rejection, and in that rejection, you carry the seeds of your redemption. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive. The story does not end here. It continues in every heart brave enough to be seen, in every spirit courageous enough to love despite the wounds, in every world that chooses mercy over dominance. This is the way of the Moonblood Chronicles. This is the way of redemption.